and helped out in all the various ways. And we'll hopefully meet up again next year.
Hey everybody, how are you doing? Stuff like that. We've made it. Can somebody do me a favor after this entire day and just shut down that light, please? I'm not sure we're allowed to touch it. If there is a switch. Okay, there we go. Thank you. I feel much better now. So we've been here for 3 days, and I'm supposed to make a speech. I will start by saying, Michael, fucking good job. I mean, as an Israeli, thank you is kind of implied, so I don't usually say it. We're very rude. I think I said this like 5 times this week. But we go abroad, and we go to a bar and ask for a beer. So you would say, hello, how are you? Oh, good. Can I have a beer? Do you have a beer? What beers do you have? Israelis would go up and say, beer! We are very rude unintentionally. Another example of that, I'm going wild here, would be we say, no, but, when what we mean to say is, yes, and. I'm serious about that. Can somebody say a random something that's completely true, 100% true? Just a sentence, anybody? No, but pizza is my favorite food. No, I'm serious. That's the way it works for us. And I can keep going. For example, we only know brainstorming mode. So I'll cut you off all the time, and it comes from excitement as opposed to me being an asshole. I am an asshole, okay? But not because of that. And another thing is we speak really loudly, so people think we fight all the time, and we're really aggressive and are like taken aback. In other words, thank you for putting up with me. But I went on a tangent. Back to point. We're closing the conference down, and I want to thank you. And I want to say something mushy and whooshy and whatever, like this wouldn't happen without you. But the truth of it is, it happens because of you. The best example is, this is the ops track. It has a lot of people in it and a lot of talks and a lot of respect. And Mike couldn't be here, so he went around and said, on Slack, anybody wants to MC? and Mike kind of just came out and said, yes. People coming in and say, can we do this project? And I'm like, you don't need to ask me for permission, just do it. Can I organize a dinner and give people free beer? Bedroom, right? Why are you asking me, right? This is kind of a community thing. This time around, though, I don't know much about how the ops track went. I don't trust this guy. But I really hope the talks, I will try to gauge that in the next few weeks, but I hope we manage to maintain our signal-to-noise ratio, as in my book, proud, the best conference for signal-to-noise ratio in the industry. I really hope that's still true. It was Ryan Moon who said, I go to a conference, kind of, doing this to ourselves, right? We're cool. We go to a conference, we get 1 to 3 ideas in the entire conference. Here I get 1 to 3 ideas after every talk, and I can go and implement that. If we maintained that, even 70% of that, I'll be happy. If we didn't, I'll shoot somebody. But that's kind of what my takeaways are. And my excitement about this track is about the videos. I know not everything was videoed, but there are so many people out there that don't have access to us, that don't have the network to say, I have just encountered something, or how do I deal with this or that. They're not part of a trust group. And being able to let them come in here to meet with the people who are and get vetted, letting them get the videos, the value of that, beyond people just sitting in the crowd, is so insane that I'm happy we're doing it. It cost us extra. We nearly didn't have the money this year, but I think that's one of the biggest values that we're getting. On the philosophy track side, we have made a huge breakthrough this year. So when we created the philosophy track, and we didn't call it management or strategy or any of that, we just called it philosophy because we knew we would talk a lot, and the ops track people would never step in and bore themselves if we called it philosophy. We were mistaken, but we've created something very unique as far as people come and submit talks about how does security work? How do we push security forward? How do we do things differently? How do we not reinvent the wheel all the time, and so on and so forth? And our challenge there was that, number one, we have the talks, and that's fine. But then we also try to sit down and workshop, create a model, a document, a framework of that. And for the last 4 years, only Tom has actually done something with that and wrote a paper out of that work. We always abandoned it afterwards. We couldn't maintain the... I have something in my eye, really, I'm not crying. Okay, I'm crying, no. And we didn't manage to create that continuity that the IETF manages to do, that FIRST manages to do, and we didn't know how. And this year, we kind of, Sunil, me, and Joel sat on day -1, and we said, we have to do something with that. This is what we wanted to do from the beginning. And from the beginning of the ops track, of the philosophy track, every talk that went up, we said, you know, this is a really cool topic. This is really important because how do we framework this thing? And when we finally broke into groups yesterday, 4 groups, we sat down, and our goal was, the first time we ran ACoD, Steve Crocker, who created RFC1, was here. And he shared with us about the process of how RFCs started and why. And we just said, you know, we just need to write drafts. They don't need to be perfect. We don't need 50 pages frameworks. We just need 5 pages, 3 pages, 7 pages that get the concept across. So the entire goal was to get those 5 pages down today. And I didn't talk to the 4th group, but I think at least 3 of the groups got those 5 pages down. And you know what? They have got down concepts that are insane. And we didn't do what we usually do, such as update with each group, because we figured it might not work this time around. Doesn't matter. But just to share with you, one of the groups looked at, in my own language, they're going to shoot me for saying it this way, all the shadow stuff, not necessarily shadow IT. People out there who create an access database, you know, vendors you don't even know about. All these people who create these risks out there, and you can't even, they don't even know they exist, not to mention manage them. Right? That's huge. They sat down and created a framework that's relatively easy to use than a 5,000 questions questionnaire, right, that you send to everybody, on how to handle that. My group, we said fake news, blah, 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 whatever, everybody talks about it, but organizations, I'm not talking about countries, organizations around the world actually, my pants are falling down, hold on, I'm sorry. Okay. Sorry, I can't keep doing this. Organizations around the world are actually being attacked. In China, in India, this is the example I usually use. I don't have the exact details, but the CEO of Air India a couple of years ago came out and said, tomorrow we're shutting down on Twitter. That wasn't good. Okay, and the people who are starting, this is not the trend yet, but people who are starting to get us to deal with this are not PR people, they're not marketing people, it's the adversarial people. Security people are said, we're being attacked by bots, you know, on the one hand, the infrastructure of attack, by information. We're getting business damage. Who is going to help us with that? And everybody who talks about fake news talks about Russia and Facebook, you know, Fox News sometimes. These are words, Trump, these are words that kind of come up. And with the solution people come up with, usually, sometimes there are a little bit of small things that come along, like let's talk about whitelisting, blacklisting, but take down bots. Bottom line is education will save us. Now, I believe in the control called education, unlike other people, but I have no belief education will be what saves us. It will take decades, and I'm not sure about even then. Okay, we have seen ourselves try that before, and we know how much user education works, right? But nobody is, and people have mapped out. There is the Amit guy, David, who sat down and actually created what are the attack types like MITRE, when you look at fake news or disinformation or whatever you want to call it right now. The academics call it weaponized narrative, which I find beautiful. So we sat down and said, okay, but how do we build a fucking, forgive me, defensive mechanism? I drew a blank. So what we did is we ended up going for a buzzword. We created a kill chain defined as, we will look at all these attack methodology we know exists, right? And then we'll say, if this is the attack methodology, right, what are the engagement points, the observables on the defensive side? I can see them creating the message, I can see them distributing, whatever. Let's put controls in place. And we did that, from taking down bots to creating trusted channels and all of that stuff, to letting our own users, we usually say never talk on Twitter about the business, go and talk about the business on Twitter, right? We've really thought about controls. So our goal there is to take what we have done, create these 5 pages, release it as a draft, follow up every 2 weeks. Some people will not be able to do it. And we actually said, you know what, if you're too lazy, too bored, too busy, that's fine. Don't find excuses. Don't feel bad. Don't skip on the call. Just, I'm involved with the World Science Fiction Convention, Worldcon. And with Worldcon volunteers, what we usually say is, fail loudly. Come in and say, I don't have the time. I don't want to do this. I'm too lazy. I'm too busy. Whatever it is, tell us immediately. And we'll handle that. So every 2 weeks, there's going to be a call for every one of these groups. And there are other groups there. I didn't mention them all. And we are going to each work 1 to 3 hours every one of these weeks, or 2 weeks, get together. Within 2 months, we're going to have a 5-page draft we believe in, send it to everybody to review and give comments. 3 to 4 months after that, we submit it through the new Threats magazine that was started at ACM, that they are friends of ours. They come here every year. And we're going to publish it. So it will be an online database of whether it's two-factor authentication and how to do it so you don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time, or what's the defensive mechanism to fake news, or how do we handle risk of third parties. Doesn't matter right now. We're going to release those things so that the philosophy part of the business, what we like to call in tech world, the bullshit part of the business that really matters, the value the business actually gives, is quantitative to a degree that technical people would appreciate. So I'm really proud of the philosophy track this year. And where are we going from here? And I'll finish with that. But this is going to be our 5th year, which is insane. And because we do it in January, it's only been 4 years or 3 years by now. It's kind of confusing. We have a few problems, or challenges. I'm in the States now, so I need to be more careful with my language. One, we had 300 tickets to sell this year, and we don't take money. Therefore, only 50 people came. 150 people just didn't show up. We have seen this before, but it was less than half of the people. And that's because people do not necessarily feel obligated to come to this event if they didn't pay money. Now, we don't want to ask for money. Part of the thing is to let everybody come in. But it's a challenge. There's 150 people. We sold out of tickets in a day and a little bit. Sold out. And everybody that wanted to come in couldn't. 150 people wanted to come in couldn't. How do we solve that? So we're thinking of incorporating. I've been very lazy the last few years. I didn't want to do it. And I like being a little bit chaotic and being a community-oriented event. So we're going to have to think about that. Maybe you can help. If we take money, we still want to let everybody come in. And maybe somebody doesn't have a corporation that pays for them. Like Sunil and I are fun employed right now. We paid for ourselves. We want them to come in for free. So how do we go about that? If we do take money, how much do we take so it's not too much and easy to approve with the corporation? And then can it cover the conference? Because I think it can't. So we have a lot of these things to think about. Another thing is, we've done this 4 times now. It's tradition to be in Austin. The chances of us moving from Austin are low. That said, we have a very nice offer to host us with everything we need in New Orleans. New Orleans? How do people say that? New Orleans. I can't say it. So we don't see a reason necessarily why not. But the challenge is, this year, even though we had sponsors, some of the sponsors fell for various reasons. One of them is we're not incorporated, so they couldn't pay for things. Some of them were bureaucratic. Nobody meant to screw us over. And people stood up and said, we will cover that. $1,000 here, $500 there. We covered it, and we're here. But I think we need to become a little bit more serious. That's just sharing a little bit of the internal thoughts of what's going on with the conference. Our goal is to maintain the quality and everything else that's going on around that. But also, how do we make sure that we are as open, unassuming, I'm very assuming, unassuming and just friendly the way we have been. So I spoke way, way more than I usually do, and I do like to talk. Thank you. That said, and I'm not going to do a full Q&A or whatever here, I would like a couple of minutes, just if somebody has something really burning that you can say later, and no thanks or whatever, that's not needed. Either something you have seen in the conference that you didn't like or really did like, that you think should be spoken of now, like a code of conduct violation, something that really disturbed you about the food not coming on time, whatever it is. Now, if you're willing to do it publicly, do it now, please. If not, we are available. You can come to any of us, Randy, Sunil, me, Joel, Steve, who wasn't here this year, Michael. Just out there? Anybody wants to say anything other than, hey, thank you, applause, great conference, whatever it is? Yes, we do have somebody. Awesome.
Firstly, I want to say great conference. It's the first time I've been to a Defenders Only conference, so it's great to see like-minded people out there like myself. And there's so many things I can take back and implement from seeing here. So thank you to everybody for that. I also wanted to quickly mention that there is dinner at 506 West Avenue, Austin, 78701 at 6 p.m. apparently, which Chris shared. So hopefully we can all get together after this if you're not flying away. Yeah.
All right. So if anybody wants dinner plans, if you can put that on Slack. It is? Awesome. Anybody else has any announcements actually to make? I didn't ask about that. Food, drinks, anything? No? In that case, Sunil, Joel, do you have anything you need to say at this point?
So I thought there would be more outreach from the other team members.
Hold on. I'll ask what I can't hear you. Hold on.
Are we not going to have other outreach?
Are we not going to what?
Okay, never mind. All right, who's next up? Who's up for the outbrief? Anybody else? All right, Tom. Thanks.
I have no idea what you said. Okay.
He said out brief, as in briefing out. So I hardly know why I walked all the way to the front. You wanted to keep the cameraman on his toes. So probably most of you have been in the ops track most of the time. I presented in the philosophy track, and I'm going to echo Gadi's comment that the videos are all there and they're going to be very valuable, I think. Just some relaxing weekend YouTube to put on in the background while you're doing other stuff in the kitchen. I'm going to outbrief on the stakeholder-specific vulnerability categorization work that was presented by Jono from Software Engineering Institute. And we took that and we made it into one of the working groups we're going to press forward on. Stakeholder-specific vulnerability categorization is a backronym of CVSS. The issue with CVSS that we've found in vulnerability management is that it only describes technical severity from typically from the patch deployer's perspective, not necessarily a prioritization scheme that you can use in your enterprise to prioritize things like everything that happened this week, right? We saw we had a what we're going to call a patch or a vulnerability Fujiwara. I'm borrowing that from the guys at Risk-Based Security. But that's when Fujiwara is when 3 hurricanes all kind of merge together in the ocean, hopefully over the ocean, hopefully not too many occupied places. But we had a vulnerability Fujiwara this week, not just because of the massive Microsoft announcement with the really scary stuff, but there was also an Oracle announcement with some really scary stuff that came out on the same day as a VMware announcement with stuff, and an Intel product security advisory also went out, all on the same day. So if you're running an enterprise and you're trying to, approve the overtime so you can get the Microsoft stuff done, like we hollered at everybody to do, you also need to make sure that you got your assets well managed, correct? You also want to make sure that you're prioritizing all the other things that you need to do. The goal of this is to create something that is fairly lightweight, uses branching logic, so it's not trying to get you to estimate some number to plug into some algebra that might pop out the other side and give you a CVSS score per se, but gives you sort of a clear, actionable decision. I don't know why my hand is shaking, sorry. A clear, actionable decision for how to patch and when. And whether you should just use your normal deployment cycle, put it in test and then put it in production, or whether you need to do something accelerated, more like put it in a production like yesterday kind of sense. So what we talked about in the working group following the presentation, I hope I gave a decent summary that's understandable for everybody of what the original work was for SSVC. What we talked about in the little working group was how are we going to evangelize this and get stakeholders to start running with it and possibly start building it into tooling. There is a Python script there's always a Python script. There's a Python script that helps you do this, where you can just like start to make your decisions, plug in your values, and get the decision out the other side. We also we're going to get a colleague at a major credit rating firm has offered to take his well-managed assets and start applying this in their environment. I work at CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is the relatively new sort of rebranded cybersecurity effort at the Department of Homeland Security. We have something that we call the Critical Vulnerability Action Protocol, which determines like what sort of coordination activities we want to use for our stakeholders. Most often the federal civilian executive branch departments and agencies, but also applied to critical infrastructure. We want to start taking this and piloting it in our action protocol to see if it helps us make better decisions in there as well. Again, all of this is designed to be an improvement over what CVSS tells you, and that's what we're going to be taking forward. We're also going to try and see if we can work with any ISACs that might be interested. So if you represent an ISAC or you're an active member in one, you can come up and talk to me, and we'll start getting you connected and point you to the YouTube and all that stuff. And also, we want to take this and present it to PCERTs, right? That's short for Product Security Incident Response Teams. Those are the teams at vendors that help figure out, like how fast to deploy a patch, what you're supposed to say, how to do all the information management that goes along with that, and notifying customers of issues when a vulnerability is discovered. And we want to see if we can provide the right kind of tooling to PCERTs so that they can provide better information out to their customers when they issue a new advisory. And last but not least, at least for the purposes of this brief presentation I'm giving right now, we also want to work with vulnerability management companies like your Tenable out there, right, so that they can use this to provide as much information as possible to their clients, and make these decisions easier in times of, vulnerability Fujiwaras, as I was saying. All right, that's that. Any questions, real briefly? Wow, okay, I guess I gave a perfect presentation then. Thank you all very much.
Feels like we're running detention or something. Thanks for not running out the door. I actually will connect my laptop if I can show something real quick. Is 90 minutes good?
30 seconds.
All right. So to make it really quick, I did a talk in the philosophy track this year talking about what we called circuit breakers. So I was just going through examples of companies that were saved because something broke, right? Like you have a breach, but the server runs out of disk space and you catch it before it's worse. Or a DHCP server goes down because it gets wiped by ransomware before all the laptops come back to the office and get an IP. Therefore, they don't get wiped by ransomware. And so we're trying to see, can we use that as a design pattern when we're designing systems? So first, what's a circuit breaker? So we have a bit.ly code here. We have a lot more, like, it's kind of rambling right now. It's a draft. We're going to try to make that clearer if you want to take a stab at it. So we did a little workshop. And we're trying to find, like, what's a circuit breaker, right? We know for electricity, circuit breaker is pretty simple. But in reality, we want things to break only when the harm that's going to come from them not breaking is bigger than the harm you're going to self-inflict, right? So, for example, maybe taking down your own DHCP server, if you know ransomware is going to be spreading, is a good idea. Though in that case, the pain from ransomware spreading everywhere is so large that might not even be enough. You might go a step further and take the network down. So a few different types of circuit breakers that we saw, well, it's like the breaker really stops something, but I think we should be applying more throttling, like limiting performance. We over-provision a lot of stuff way beyond what we need, and now with virtualization in cloud, it's actually pretty easy to adjust the provisioning of systems. And there's so many breaches. Like, I'm sure everyone who's done incident response here has at least a few examples of a breach that got caught because someone was doing select star on some database with customer information, causing a bunch of deadlocks. And that's the only reason you ever caught that breach. But if that SQL server had been 5 times faster, maybe you never would have known. So why don't we throttle these select star queries that you probably shouldn't have to begin with? And then interrupts are more like pauses, right? So if you have many small pauses, it turns into a throttle. But why don't we do more things like limiting successful authentication, right? We lock accounts when someone comes back from vacation and makes a mistake in a password 3 times, but we don't lock accounts when someone successfully logs into 10,000 workstations at once. Doesn't make any sense. So we looked at when we would apply these types of circuit breakers. So it's your margin of safety, right? And when does the upside of a system, for example, being over-provisioned, when that's worth it is when the downside of it being over-provisioned or being super reliable and replicating everywhere is lower. So, for example, if you have a system that's very fast and that brings a lot of value to your company, obviously you don't want to slow that down for no reason. And you only want to use these types of very aggressive circuit breakers if the harm you're going to suffer is irreversible and unacceptable. So I think, I've suffered through a lot of critical, massive incidents where entire companies going down, databases being deleted, entire networks being wiped. In all of these cases, the harm from shutting down a few offices from the main VPN would totally have been worth it. But sometimes if it's a minor breach, you don't want to be the guy setting the data center on fire because then that's obviously not worth it. So we then used the cyber defense matrix just to see what kind of examples we could find for network-centric, application-centric, and user-centric. And from a network point of view, I think we don't do a whole lot of proactive disabling of things like DNS resolution to the internet when you think something might be exfiltrating data over DNS. Enabling host isolation on a Wi-Fi network when you usually don't have that because you need devices to talk to one another. If you detect suspicious lateral movement going on, the harm you're going to inflict yourself by enabling host isolation temporarily is almost nothing, right? You might break a few things, you get to the bottom of it, and then you disable it. One idea that I'll definitely take back, next time I see, I had a lot of customers in the past, clients that were really bad at egress filtering on servers, right? I'm sure you've all seen these server environments, no egress filtering, super fast access to the internet, and then doing proper egress filtering takes forever, right? Because you got to find everything that you need. Oh, well, we get patches straight from the internet. We need an update server. We need a whitelist and everything. And I've seen companies take years to do proper egress filtering on their data centers. And I'm just thinking, why did we leave full gigabit internet access to these servers, right? It might take them 2 years to do proper whitelisting. But in the meantime, there's almost no reason for these servers to be able to upload to the internet because we're actually disabling that. So why don't we reduce the bandwidth to the internet there? Because the downside is very small, but the upside is really, really high, making it much harder to steal 10 terabytes of data. And then we have similar examples for user-centric activity. Right? I think we need to take more action to disable sessions, force people to re-authenticate when we detect something specific. But I think for those of you using cloud environments, like in Amazon, but you can do that with all of them, just have different names, why don't we have an IAM policy that's ready to make two-factor extremely aggressive when we think something really bad is going on in that cloud environment, right? We see weird activity in the cloud, just enable that policy, link it to all the users, force people to redo their two-factor way more often than they would normally. Little harm, we're going to annoy a few people while we get to the bottom of it. We didn't set anything on fire, and maybe we stopped an incident before it became a breach or something more terrible. Then from a data point of view, there's taking the decryption keys offline. Then we start to get into the more aggressive steps, right? Just breaking access to that data, removing permissions. On the application side, it's kind of similar. So we have a few more examples. I don't want to be talking for half an hour, even though I have an hour. But I'll go back to the link that I had here. So if you want to note that down, what I'll do, probably not next week because I have a lot of travel, but in 2 weeks, I'll go back and I'll clean that up, make sure that we have common terms to use that, and try to keep that in mind when you're working, engineering new solutions, deploying new environments. Think of the worst case scenario, and then think of what would you endure to prevent that from happening, right? It's like cutting your arm off because it's infected before it spreads to the rest of your body. There's many cases where I think we can take much more aggressive action to prevent incidents from turning into massive ones. However, that means that we need to be very serious about false positives and when we do take action, because as an industry, I think we have a problem with false positives, and that's going to reduce our credibility with IT teams and devs and the business if we start saying, well, when we detect something bad, we're just going to set the office on fire, because we'd be doing that 20,000 times a day. So we need to pick some very specific examples, and I think if we keep that in mind, like I'll definitely use that internet upload bandwidth limitation in the future when I have clients that just can't do proper whitelisting. I'll make sure that I don't over-provision storage again, because that's always like a nice staging server with a few terabytes of disk space is very useful to attackers. So try to keep those concepts in mind. I'll make sure to update the Google Docs in the next 2 weeks, and then hopefully if we can keep doing some updates through the year. I don't know that we'll be able to do a 2-week schedule, but next year we can probably come up with a more structured framework for thinking about this. So maybe then we'll talk about it again. Maybe some of you have some good examples for that type of stuff. Thank you. Is there anyone next? Yeah. Okay, that's my dongle. Okay. But you can use it.
Anyone have any questions while he's setting up? I actually remember a circuit breaker that I forgot to add. So I remember when Equifax happened, someone mentioned if they had, if they were using an HSM, which I believe they were, if they just put a throttle on the HSM, meaning 1 million, let's say, just as some number that is arbitrarily large, but sufficiently small enough that it would take them a long time.
Well, we had it in the data, like removing access to the encryption keys, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's a HSM, you said like 1 billion records were just encrypted, that's like shut it down.
Right. So it's gonna exceed some crazy threshold. You shut it down, but you would have a breach of 1 million versus hundreds of million, right? So, all right, over to you.
Thanks, Anil. Hi, I'm John Duxta. I spoke in the philosophy track about, I called it Guerrilla GRC, and it's really just about streamlining vendor security reviews when when your security team doesn't include a GRC person, right? There are lots of small security teams out there who, don't yet have folks to handle specifically this kind of stuff. So, and that resonated with a couple of folks, specifically Joel Wilbanks. And so he and I spent a fair amount of time the last day and a half or so kind of going over this. And the place where it struck a chord for Joel was that it's not just vendor assessments that actually we have this issue with. It's, and as Gadi was mentioning, things like, Fred in accounting decides that he's going to spin up a little access database thing. It's any kind of system that you have. It's just that in my particular case, it's vendor stuff. So we started to put together some information about how to, first off, how to engage with your users, right? You need to let your users know that they need to engage with you. So there's a bit of user education there. That's always the tough part in security, but we do our best. And then from that, like how to get information from them concisely, like ask them 2, 3, 4 questions tops. Just give me a little bit of information to work with. And so we're starting to work out on this. Obviously, the doc is a giant pile of poo right now and needs a lot of cleaning up and reorganization. And that's what Joel and I will be doing over the next couple of weeks or next couple of months and get something out there so we can see if it's publishing worthy. One of the things that we started to talk about just to have something somewhat pretty to look at, and of course you can't read any of the labels on this, so I'll have to walk you through it. So this is, on the left, is risk, right? from no risk to asymptotically infinite risk. And then from left to right, it's the depth of review of the system. And is also analogous with time, or at least time of your knowledge of the system. But it's mostly depth of review. So you start out, a thing exists, and you have no knowledge of it. And since you have no knowledge of it, its risk is asymptotically approaching infinity, because it's all the way up there. Then as soon as you get that first engagement from your user with some information about what the heck they're doing, find out like what kind of data they're dealing with, what's the classification. Well, whoosh, oh boy, okay, now you know something, and the risk has come down. This line here is for that class of data, what your organizational risk acceptance is. So that risk may still be higher, because you know very little about it, about what they're doing, higher than what your organizational acceptance is. And so you want to continue with your depth of review and move along. And then, so then there's parts, so you can get your vendor, in the vendor case, go and query a lot of information from your vendors, send them a questionnaire, get some SOC 2s, review all that stuff, poke at their services a little bit. Then you have a good idea, better feeling about what's going on there. And then, that doesn't stop there. And this is another part of the whole engineering process of this is, you definitely, you don't want to just set your user free and say, great, Widget Cloud is awesome. You go ahead and use Widget Cloud, you're approved. Well, how are they using Widget Cloud? How are they integrating with it? There's that integration review step, where you know that they're doing the right thing with it and have properly integrated it, and you've confirmed that. So sort of just, it's a path of bringing our risk down over time. And then, maybe sometime in the future, maybe next year we'll have some tooling to help automate some of this, some of the review type things, or maybe help tickle things to see, hey, has anything changed with that vendor? Has their risk profile changed at all? So those are some ideas that we were kind of playing with. But yeah, that's kind of what we're doing. Keep an eye out. I put the bit.ly link in the general channel for the flaming pile of poo that is that doc. And thank you very much. If you have any questions, anybody? Bueller?
All right. I think Gadi had something else he wanted to show. We have the lead win? The cops are there. Yeah. I got to get out quickly, huh? All right. 20 minutes. All right. Yeah. Well, before we leave then, if there's stuff to throw away, please pick it up and chuck it out the door because, not the door, chuck it in the trash can because we otherwise have to pay for the labor for it. All right. Hang on a second. I got it. What are you covering?
It's on Slack on. I need to be able to move between tabs. Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'll do it really quickly because I already talked about most of this. This is the kill chain. Very simply put, we have the methodology for attacking or launching information operations on this side, from goal definition to message construction all the way to distribution and amplification. Here up top we have from detect, understand, which is knowledge analysis that came from detection, all the way to infiltrate, which you might want to find a different word for, dilute, and so on and so forth. And we have the controls, such as, for example, we talked about some earlier, but I'll add one more. There are already people looking at brand protection, phishing detection, social media monitoring, dark web, already to organizations at various places, but they don't look for this. They can feed it to us. Another example of a control, let's go randomly, audience selection. These are more gap analysis questions, is inoculation. Can we educate? Another example, let's go to random something. You stop moving. Okay. There are things such as fast approval channels and all of that, but you can also do things such as create an official channel to your own employees, as we talked earlier, so they can talk for you if you're willing to take the risks of lawsuits or PR damage because you're being under massive attack. There are a lot of different things here. It's just the beginning of the work. If you can switch to the other tab there. This is more of a registry of the various controls. Who does the control affect? Is it the defenders, the attackers? Is it the third party? Is it neutrals? And so on and so forth. And then descriptions of the controls. And in the last one, we have a lexicon, which essentially explains the terminology we use. This is, I think, pretty cool. Still very early, but pretty cool. To actually give a methodology for how to defend or start to defend against disinformation attacks, propaganda, fake news, whatever you want to call it. And this will turn into some sort of document and will become another draft that ACoD will release. That's it. Thank you very much.
All right. So we're basically out of time. Thank you very much for coming. We look forward to seeing you again next year. Please clean up.
Bye.
We're not your mother. Bye, Gadi. Thank you very much, everyone.